Hello and welcome to the Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast in association with Laithwaite's Wine, the official wine partner of the ECB. Laithwaite's stop at nothing to bring you great wines and have done so for over 50 years. As part of our partnership, you are able to get 25% off 6 or more bottles when using the code Wisden at checkout. We'll be sampling some more of their produce later in the episode. It's September the 28th and the cricket season is just about still going. This is our end of season wrap. We'll be reflecting on the summer. Towards the end of the episode, we'll also be looking back at the England-Ireland series, the end of the county championship, the ECB's response to the ICEC Report, and much more. I'm Rana, and with me today is Phil Walker, Jo Harman, Katya, Witney, and Mark Butcher will be joining us later in the show. Let's start on that England-Ireland series. Phil, lots of young-ish batters did well. Who knows what England could have ended up on had the rain not come at Bristol. It was good to see Sam Hain get his first bat for England. He's someone who has been talked about as a possible England player for years now. He started really well as a teenager, but for whatever reason has never quite broken into a squad. He got runs at Nottingham. What did you make of watching him bat for England for the first time?
Much as to be expected. He's a class player. He's a brilliant 50-over cricketer, as we know. His record stands up with anyone's in the world, really. And there was the inevitability to that runnable 80-odd. He started slowly-ish, but then they'd lost a few up top and a bit of a mini recovery required. I thought he dovetailed nicely with Will Jacks. Owen Morgan saw it slightly differently on the commentary. He was, I'd say, hypercritical of him, which surprised me. I thought it was a little bit harsh for a fellow who's basically just starting out. I guess the frustration is that it confirmed what he's really good at, and what he's really good at, it feels like a relic of a vanishing or dying age anyway, right? 50-over cricket, as we know, has been squeezed and pushed to the sidelines. It's been buffeted by other more powerful, lucrative things. And he is almost a 50-over specialist. He's a very good red ball cricketer as well, and he's got a good T20 record, but you wouldn't put him in that kind of explosive top bracket in 20-over cricket necessarily, certainly not for an England player. 50-over cricket, he could play 150 ODIs if there were 150 ODIs available to him over the next 7 or 8 years, but I'm not sure there's going to be. But look, I was pleased for him, and he was obviously carrying that tag of being the best to not play for England, you know, passed down from Hildreth and all the rest of it. So at least he can get rid of that one. But I wonder just how much more he will be playing for England. I'd say he's certainly good enough. And perhaps, you know, at 28, perhaps there is still chances in red ball cricket as well for him down the line. I would say he's got the game for it.
Sorry to stop you in full flow, Phil, but Surrey just won the county championship.
There we go. Yes. Right.
It's all done.
Talk me through it, Joe.
I wasn't actually watching. I just looked up and they were all walking off the field. So that's
a limp end by Essex, I would say.
Yeah.
211 all out. Deficit of 158 on first innings, but of course they needed to get 400 and get 400 fast. And 211 in 74 overs. They haven't scored enough runs across the year, Essex. And it's been borne out yet again here.
And we'll get to why they needed such a dramatic turnaround this week later in the show. Joe, back to Hain. I guess the model for him is someone like Dawid Malan. And Dawid Malan said something quite interesting. Dawid Malan, by the way, made his England debut at 29, Hain's 28. And Malan said something quite interesting after the Lord's ODI. He said, to get into this England batting lineup, you either need to be a freak or be really consistent. And there is still space for someone to do what Malan has done and what Hain could potentially do in the years to come.
Yeah, it's a really good comparison, actually. I can see that. Definitely. The difference, of course, is that Hain doesn't actually get to play much 50-over cricket in order to push his case in that format. So he's effectively pushing his case for 50-over cricket whilst playing T20 or the 100, which he's still a very good T20 player, but it's not really his forte. So I think he's got a harder job than Malan did to get in consistently. Also, there is just more batting talent around. I mean, we've seen in that series Will Jacks batting beautifully, Ben Duckett getting 100. I think Ben Duckett would be pretty near the top of the queue for a World Cup reserve should anyone go down injured in India. So it's just a really tough job. But whatever happens, I'm glad he got his opportunity and got some runs and proved what everyone knew, that he's good enough for that level. But there are just players they think are slightly better.
Katya, Rehan Ahmed took 4 wickets in the Nottingham win. He's only 19, but I thought it was very encouraging to see that he's already changing what he does, and the changes worked.
Yeah, it's really encouraging, isn't it, seeing bowl the way he did. I think all 4 of the wickets he took in that innings were googlies. He bowled an absolute ripper to get Andy McBride. I think it pitched on like middle and off and then hit the outside off stump. But when you've got someone so young and who's come to so much attention so young, it's actually pretty cool to be able to see them develop in terms of like their game intelligence and their tactical mindset throughout like the years into when he becomes whatever he will become. And if you look at the difference between when he was in both Pakistan and Bangladesh earlier this year, there's actually quite a big difference already to see how he's kind of grown and matured a bit in how he's playing and how he's thinking about the game. And that was really evident when he was bowling in that innings. Because in Bangladesh earlier this year, I thought he looked slightly, I wouldn't say out of his depth, but he looked his age and he looked inexperienced and he looked like he was relying on others around him. And he looked so confident in the ODI against Ireland. And that was really, really good to see. And with England entering this new kind of era of looking for Adil Rashid's replacement, I'm not saying that he is the one to go and replace Adil Rashid, but he's so far at the front of the queue of young leg spinners who are kind of lining up to come in and fill that role that Rashid's filled for so long. It's unreal, really, how far ahead he is.
Yeah.
Bless you.
Wow.
Blimey. You flew backwards with it. Yeah, just around him. It was an important performance for him because he's not had it all his own way this year. Just got his stats up here: 8 wickets at 66 in the championship. So it's been tough going for him. He's gone much better in T20 cricket, and that's a format he's obviously more comfortable with at this stage. But it'll be fascinating to see if England do go with him for India. I suspect they will put him in the squad, but those numbers don't scream pick me for a Test series against the most dominant side in the home conditions in the world by a distance. So it's really good. If he needed a bit of a pick me up, that obviously provided it, and it's good to see him still developing his game. But yeah, it's obviously not going to be a smooth pathway for him as a very, very young leg spinner who got picked early. It would be extraordinary if it was. It hasn't really happened before, so there's going to be ups and downs. But yeah, we'll see what the next few months hold for him.
Is it fair to say that he's had a slightly middling year overall, Rana?
It's been all right. He's done well in the white ball stuff, and in the championship he didn't play. He played quite a bit in April, where not many spinners do well in April, and he batted quite well actually. But with the ball, as Jo says, he very quiet in the championship, but hasn't actually played that much either. I mean, personally, the reason why, as Katya was saying, the reason why I was so impressed with him in this game was that when people first saw him, the question mark was amazing googly, it turns loads, but his leg spinner doesn't really look like what it should be for an international wrist spin bowler. Whereas here, he bowled 85% of his balls were leg spinners, and then he was still picking up wickets with the googly, using it as a surprise ball rather than a sock ball, and that is a clear leap in development compared to what we saw a year or so ago. I thought it was quite interesting. Matthew Mott afterwards was saying that there won't be set reserves for this World Cup as there were in the T20 World Cup last year. He said a big reason for that was when the T20 World Cup was in Australia, it takes 24 hours to fly someone out, so you need 3 reserve players physically in the country. So someone like Duckett, I can imagine if it's Stokes that goes down, he's the one who might come in. Whereas if it's an opener, then it could be Roy, who, by the way, is available if
he's said, hasn't he, Roy?
Yeah.
Or Mott has made it clear that Roy is very keen to be that reserve player.
Yeah. Phil, it wasn't all good for England. There was a memorable debut for the wrong reasons for George Scrimshaw, who had a nightmare start, bowled 6 no balls in his first 2 overs, conceded 35 from his first 11 deliveries before he got a wicket with the last ball of his over, his second over, and he looked physically sick as the TV check was being done on whether or not he'd overstepped that delivery, and umpire Rob Tucker even gave him a consolatory pat on the back, which you're not really supposed to do as an umpire.
Yeah, Rod Tucker's great, isn't he?
Yeah.
But I think that's the big takeaway from it, but he is. Yeah, look, it's obviously a bit of a video nasty for him, and be the first time that he's been subjected to that kind of scrutiny, and no doubt through the chaos of thoughts in his mind, he'll be thinking this is going to be clipped up, this is going to be discussed on podcasts, and obviously memed to within an inch of its life and all the rest of it, and it can be a brutal place. I found the wicket, and I was watching it live behind the sofa. The wicket was one of the most satisfying moments of the whole summer. And his reaction humanized him all the more because, as you say, not only was he terrified that he'd overstepped again, but then when he realized he'd got away with it, it was just, I say got away with it, that he'd done it properly.
Yeah.
The relief on his just oozed out of him, and there was no joy. There was just another little glimpse into the sort of the fundamental horrors of playing cricket as you saw it again. So much of it is avoiding defeat, failure, and humiliation. That's so much of the battle, and he was living that nightmare. And then he got one. It was a really good ball, by the way.
Yeah.
Balburney's a good player, pushed forward, a decent catch at first slit, so it's a proper wicket. But there was
and also quite an important wicket as
and
well.
It was, because the character Sterling at the other end, he was whacking it, and they'd got off the 50 for 0 off 6, whatever it was. Anyway, it was a really lovely, humanising moment to see him get that, and I hope that he can recover from it. You still have the components of a good looking bowler there. He's tall, he's got a bit of pace. They like him. He's got a high action. There was also a photograph that you showed me earlier this morning of the team celebrating what looks like a kind of school PE gym. I don't know where it was. I guess in the bowels of
Gloucester Indoor School.
Yeah. And you couldn't look less out of place if you tried. He's standing at the back. He's quite like a beanpole looking lad anyway, and he just feels deeply self-conscious to be there, and that's a real shame because he's a bowler that they follow. They don't give these things out for free or out of sentiment, and I just hope, and I'm sure he will, with a bit of tinkering here and a bit more work with one or two bowling coaches, he'll sort that no ball problem out and maybe come again. Just briefly, check out Scott Cease or Sice, I don't know how you pronounce it, on Twitter, SEISS, American comedian, the absolute spit of George Scrimshaw. Once you've watched it, he's funny, by the way.
I thought you were going to say he'd done a skit on Scrimshaw's opening
no,
spell against
Ireland.
Ireland.
Once you watched it, all you can see is this fella.
Yeah, I mean, when he was going through the no ball problems, I felt so sorry for him, partly because, bad things happen in cricket, but his captain, Zach Crawley, but these guys barely know each other. There's the weirdness to this series in that it was, it's hard to call them a team. It was, these guys were almost on trial to show the coach what they can do in person. And Zach Crawley, I thought actually managed the situation really well. He's probably doesn't know him very well. And I imagine it was a pretty lonely place to be for Scrimshaw. And I was really glad that not only did he get that wicket, he takes a game-winning wicket, but also he got to celebrate properly the other 2 wickets he got. It wasn't just a relief, I guess.
I don't think he really did celebrate the 3rd wicket, to be honest. He still looked pretty miserable coming off the field at the end of it.
There's a good chance he'd have never met Crawley before. They play in different divisions, play in different groups in the Blast. You probably turn up, meet your England captain, who's not really the England captain, and you're full of a team of players who haven't met each other. Yeah, it would be a kind of slightly odd experience.
There's something to be said for Crawley there, though, because he's captaining his first international match, and something like that happens, which is difficult for any captain to handle. And he did handle it pretty well, but you've thrown Scrimshaw in, and he's had that kind of nightmare, and he hasn't got that safety net to fall back on of a group of really experienced players who know how to handle that kind of situation. And it's a big risk, and I know that there was a lot of inexperience around that squad, but Scrimshaw almost felt the most kind of untested or the most kind of unknown of those fast bowlers. So it was a massive risk to not have that kind of safety net of Joss Buttler and people putting their arms around him. Instead, you've got Zach Crawley, who's still trying to, get into the first choice one day side to put your arm around him. It's just not really the same. No offense to Zach Crawley, but, it's not really the same.
The Bristol ODI was a little bit of a fast towards the end.
I was going to ask you about this. So you were there, right?
Yeah. Ask away.
Well, there's been some criticism of the ground staff.
Yeah.
And
some conflicting stories as well, isn't there? So there's some blaming the umpires, some blaming the ground staff.
Yeah, what was your reading of it?
So, just for context, 33 minutes between the players going off the field and the umpires calling it off, and there were 6.5 hours remaining in theory. So, there's loads of time left. And Sky Sports showed that the ground staff did not cover the pitch adequately. And as a result, Paul Eiffel took one look at the pitch and was like, there ain't no cricket happening today. Personally, I think the issue was that the ground staff, 2 issues. ground staff didn't bring the covers on quickly enough, which I think is on the umpires. It was really clear there was going to be a very short, sharp burst of rain. And when Hayne got out, there was a very obvious time as they were taking drinks to bring on the covers, but they didn't bring on the covers until the rain physically fell. And the rain was really, really heavy. The winds was really strong. So they were up against it, and they obviously struggled to cover. They didn't cover the pitch adequately. But secondly, there's also, I think, a discussion to be had about why is there an England international at a ground that doesn't have the best facilities, and they don't have a hover cover. The size of their ground staff, which they increase for England games, is still not as much as you get at a ground like Surrey or Lancashire. And you felt for the fans, because you don't get a refund if there's more than 30 overs of cricket played, and there are 31 overs played. And if you're going to have cricket played in late September, I don't understand why it isn't a priority to make sure that Bristol has the top facilities, has as many ground staff as they need, because tickets aren't cheap, and a lot of people went home that day. I know they got to see England whack it early on, and it was that would have been fun, but you pay a lot of money to go and watch an ODI and you don't get a refund, and it was probably preventable. I know there was a lot of heavy rain overnight, but the shower was so short, I don't think it was curtains, and it went from heavy rain to bright sunshine for the rest of the day. So I thought it was Bristol hosting an England-Australia ODI on the 29th of September next year. I think for that, they've got to have more ground staff. They've got to have better facilities. And I don't think that's on Gloucestershire. I think that's the ECB's responsibility as the board responsible for the overall hosting of international cricket.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Definitely, there shouldn't be any question about taking these games around the country. Definitely. But yeah, you're right. Just make sure that there are stipulations in place to ensure that it gives itself the best chance. I'm just going to give a little glimpse, because I know my boss doesn't listen to this show or anything like that. I actually had a snooze during that period, right? I was working from home, chipping away, had a snooze, woke up like 45 minutes later and the game had been abandoned. I was like, what the hell has happened here? But now I know. Do
you regularly take midday, mid-afternoon snoozes?
I have a 45-minute sometimes,
okay.
Yeah. It energises me for the workload to come, yes.
Good to know.
Laughing at Harman.
Nick asks, what has to happen before someone in the corridors of power says we might be playing a bit too much cricket here? The Leeds and Bristol washouts are no longer full crowds, the second string teams, the injuries, the ennui of genuine cricket lovers. What more do they need? Joe.
Oh, really?
I don't mind.
I thought it was a
like
rhetorical question, to be honest.
I actually don't mind series like that personally.
I don't have an issue with second string sides playing. I mean, if fans are going to be prepared to turn up and watch it, I think that's fine. I think it's quite exciting. Maybe this is from a different perspective because we're excited to see new players, and I don't know if fans necessarily feel the same if they forked out for a ticket on the day. So maybe that doesn't necessarily apply to fans who are paying. But and when we say that England need to play Ireland, they need to play sides who aren't Australia, India, and give the rest a chance. Well, that is going to end up with an already bloated calendar. I'm not sure there is an answer to that. I don't think the overall international schedule this summer was ridiculous, to be honest. I thought England played a decent amount of cricket, probably a little bit too much, but that's just the way of the world, and that's what I think the ECB feels needs to happen to keep the money rolling in. But
and also there's a lot of mouths to feed, right? Bristol, heartbreaking for them the way that it played out, and questions perhaps of the running of it, perhaps. But that would have been the biggest. They'd have been working on that game for months, right? And you think of the money that comes in across the course of a summer, that is their biggest single cash cow by miles. And if we are trying to grow the game across the 18, and if we're trying to develop more grounds that can host international cricket, then we need more games to play, right? And so I don't have any issue with it at all. The timing of it, sure. And I think Bristol has been particularly harshly dealt with by the weather. And to have a game 2 days off from October next year, again, is dicing with danger for sure. But I think the amount that England have played over the summer, I'm okay with entirely.
Is it worth pointing out that in Bristol's case, I think that match just about crossed the threshold to when they didn't have to give any partial refunds back to fans?
Yeah, 1 over.
Yeah, exactly.
1 over.
So.
Yeah.
The World Cup starts a week today. England versus
madness.
New Zealand in Ahmedabad. So the county championship finishes on Friday, and then next Thursday
finished.
the World Cup starts. We'll be doing one big fat World Cup preview episode next Monday, so watch out for that. Dan asks, why do fans and players, I think, all get more excited for the ODI World Cup than the T20 World Cup, but then spend 4 years saying bilateral ODIs are rubbish? It's a really good question. It's a really good question. I'm really excited for the World Cup, but I say bilateral ODIs are rubbish. I was mouthing off about the New Zealand series, etc. Does anyone want to take that?
Well, it's prestige, it's history, isn't it? We still don't really have that with the T20 World Cup, but I think the 50 over World Cup still does have that sense of meaning something a lot. And also because it's every 4 years, the T20 World Cups are more regular than that now. So there is still that, it's arrived and everyone's got their World Cup memories. Dan's absolutely right. And we it feels chaotic, the build up to this World Cup. The provisional squads have been a bit of a mess. We've had quite a lot of high profile injuries. Still, at this point, Australia haven't confirmed their squad. There's suggestions that Labuschagne might come in at the very last minute. And I think a lot of this is to do with the fact that so little ODI cricket has been played. And when countries do play it, they don't necessarily play their first team. So we've been talking about this with England, but a lot of sides don't really know their best team or have a clear strategy of playing because it hasn't been a thing. In a sense, though, it kind of all adds to the excitement of this tournament. I think, we all made our predictions, but I think we'd all say that we're sort of sticking our finger in the air, really. It feels like a very open tournament. We were suddenly thinking, oh, God, India are a bit good, aren't they? Who's going to be able to beat them? And then Australia turned them over in albeit a warm-up game, but against a strong Indian side yesterday.
Yeah, I sort of wonder as well that actually the playing pool is quite similar to 2019 World Cup. So there are a lot of familiar players, a generation of players for whom is almost certainly their last World Cup. And I wonder if that adds to the fan experience, I guess, there's a familiarity there.
I think also there's a struggle associated with the 50 over World Cup that perhaps you don't get with the 20 over World Cup. The 20 over World Cup is faster for obvious reasons, but it's more condensed. There is more randomness baked into it, which is fun, but it doesn't quite have the grandeur of a 50 over World Cup. And to win a 50 over World Cup, no one really argues if you've won a 50 over World Cup. Whereas with the 20 over World Cup, you can sort of...
Well, unless you win it by virtue of hitting more boundaries.
Sure. But if you get to the final, then no one's really arguing with that. But with the 20 over World Cup, you can kind of stink the place out.
All it takes
hang in there.
And all it takes is a rained off game and it changes the whole dynamic of the group. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And one of the useful sort of unintended byproducts of this pathetic idea of contracting it is at least you have sort of clarity of structure right now, and everyone plays everyone else. You can't get much clearer than that. There can't really be any sort of caveats. Well, hold on, Group B was considerably easier to get out of than Group A, etc., etc. Everyone plays everyone else. Semi-final, final. That you can't argue with whoever gets to that final.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I think also this World Cup is 6.5 weeks long. Like, you can really get your teeth into a 50 over World Cup in a way that you can't really with a 20 over World Cup. The games come so fast in a 20 over World Cup, whereas in a 50 over World Cup, you've kind of got the time to sit back and really think about or maybe people don't do that, but I do, really sit back and think about what's happened and what it means. And that's quite a good thing, especially in winter in England. That's quite a good thing to be able to get your teeth into with bilateral cricket. Like, the Island Series was over in a week, so a tournament that you can actually sit and watch for a month and a half, actually quite a good thing.
My worry is that obviously if you're listening to this podcast, you're aware a World Cup's about to happen, but I worry that more casual cricket fans don't really know it's coming.
Oh, absolutely.
There's been no wider talk, all the talk about the Ashes, understandably so, but with the 2019 World Cup, at least from an English perspective, there was so much talk for 4 years about that World Cup, whereas this is just sort of happening.
In its favour.
Only over here. I mean, in India, it'll be the talk of the town.
Yeah, but you're talking about UK audience.
Yeah, UK audience.
But in its favour, the timings generally, there are different times for different games, but work pretty well. It's what a lot of 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock.
Yeah, I think they start at 9:30 until the clocks change, when they become 8:30 starts. So,
Yeah.
so it basically alongside the working day.
Yeah, exactly. So as long as you don't have to work too hard.
Well, I'll get my 45-minute in around lunch.
As everyone's sort of mentioned, more injury news this week. Anrik Nortje and Wanindu Hasaranga have both been ruled out of the tournament. It's a long list of A-list absentees.
Yeah.
Nortje, Hasaranga, Travis Head, we think will be in the Australia squad, but he's out of at least the first half of the tournament. Jofra Archer, Naseem Shah. And
For
then
Sri Lanka, add in Dushmantha Chamira as well, who's
Yeah.
probably their best fast bowler.
He's out as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you
Yeah.
take out, their gun spinner, stroke all-rounder, and their fast bowler, and Sri Lanka, who only, a week or so ago were looking like they were shaping up quite nicely, then got absolutely hammered by India in the Asia Cup final, now don't have their two best bowlers, and now it's looking like quite a stretch for them to be anything other than also-rans, I think.
Yeah. And then there's been some drama in the Bangladesh camp, so listen carefully. So Tamim Iqbal, until a couple of months ago, was the Bangladesh captain. He then retired on the spot in July, and then a couple of days later reversed his decision after personal intervention from the Bangladeshi Prime Minister. A few days ago, Tamim was still playing for Bangladesh against New Zealand. He got some runs, and it looked like he'd be part of their World Cup plans. Then he was sensationally not named in Bangladesh's 15-man squad. After this, there were rumours that due to his back issues, Tamim had said that he would only be able to play in 4 or 5 of the games. He then released an explosive tell-all video on Facebook where he said, "Let me clarify that at no point did I tell anyone that I shall not play more than 5 matches. This was clarified by the selector. What I actually told the selectors was, see, the pain will be there. This is how my body is going to be. But just keep this in mind when you pick the squad. I could have played in all 9 matches." Then he said it was suggested that he moved down the order. So he has never done anything but open the batting in ODI cricket. And he said, "When I was told this, I lost my calm. I felt that they were deliberately creating obstacles for me. I said, if that is what you want, don't send me to the World Cup. I don't want to be part of this filth where you make me endure something new every day."
Filth.
Then Shakib Al
Batting at
Hassan.
3, absolute filth.
Then Shakib, who's the now semi-reluctant captain, did an interview yesterday saying it's totally childish. A player should bat at any position for the team. Team comes first. It doesn't make any difference if you've made 100 or 200 and the team loses. What can you do with personal achievement? So yeah, Shakib's not happy. And it's a shame. Tamim Iqbal is a really good player with a really good ODI record, with a lot of experience. And Bangladesh obviously will be worse off without him. So injury, not the reason why I won't be seeing Tamim, but as another big name not at the World Cup.
And bad news for my team.
Your team?
I'm going to be Bangladesh's correspondent, right? Over the next few weeks?
Yeah.
No, not confirmed.
Not 100% confirmed, but yeah, so we're
We're
going...
still shopping around before getting to you.
Look, I'm available if selected.
So we are going daily during the World Cup. So we'll be hitting your feeds an hour or so after each game finishes. We've got an expanded cast. We've got
Thank God.
experts from Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. We'll be seeing more of Butch. We'll be seeing more of Cam Ponsonby and Jim Wallace. I'll be honest, I'm sort of dreading it, but also looking forward to it as well. 6.5 weeks.
4 years ago.
6.5 weeks is a long time.
4 years ago, we did it for a daily, and you guys were all off doing some other projects. Phil and I basically carried the thing for 6 weeks, and, and we got through it.
Yeah, to be fair, that was a struggle as well. So,
did we do that every day?
One of us did, yeah.
Bloody hell!
I remember disappearing off to Glastonbury for a week and coming back and wasn't sure who was in a worse state after I came back, me or you, from having done a week of podcast.
Yeah. So plenty of podcasts to look forward to. The county championship is now decided. Surrey are champions after Essex didn't achieve the miracle that they needed to overturn the 20-point swing that would have given them the title. So Surrey champions for the second year in a row. I feel we've talked about Surrey quite a lot this summer. We watched quite a lot of Surrey. They've sort of staggered over the line. It's not been totally convincing at the end, but when they have their first team, when the England players are available, there is no team stronger than them, and they accommodate for the loss of England players very well.
Yeah, the dynasty argument is definitely on here, isn't it? 2-2 now, and you feel like they are entrenched in the top 2 or 3 teams for forevermore. The setup here is extraordinary, really. 19,000 of the 60,000 members across the whole of the county game are Surrey members. They've tied it in very smartly to test match tickets and getting priority, etc., etc. But all of that plays into the impression that this is a club that is run just that little bit more cannily and a little bit more progressively than the other big hitters out there. They, as you say, have won the championship despite their Red Bull team being almost decimated, really, for the last 3 games due to ODI call-ups and a couple of injuries and so on. But they recruit brilliantly. They bring players through when they need to. They have great reach as well. You know, Sai Siddharthan, for example, brilliant 21-year-old Indian lefty. He's come in and played nicely in this final game here against Hampshire, made a 70-odd in their first innings. They just do things very, very cleverly. And
they recruit really well. So people talk about the high-profile players, but 2 of their best players this season
Jordan Clark
and Dan Worrell. You know,
brilliant
2 players who don't play international cricket, quite far away from playing international cricket.
Who at the time as well, I remember when the Dan Worrell signing came through, I was a bit like, is that what they need? You know, a sort of aging, I know he can play on a UK passport, so he wasn't an overseas player, but an aging Australian who has a very good record, but not phenomenal, and they already had such good pace bowling resources. But he's been absolutely key. I mean, I don't want to diminish their achievement because winning the county championship is still, I think, the hardest thing to do in county cricket, and you know, the most impressive accolade you can get. But now they're winning it back-to-back seasons. It's kind of like, why weren't they always doing this? Given the resources they've got at their disposal, given the academy they have, given the finances, given the membership, given everything they've got in their favour, you now think, God, how's anyone ever going to win this title? But that said, Essex did push them hard and could have pushed them a bit harder with maybe slightly cannier leadership themselves in the penultimate round of games.
I thought sorry. Finally, I think the academy production is also a huge part of it. In that you're losing the England players, and then Jamie Smith comes in, and then Tom Laws comes in. Tom Laws is someone who a lot of listeners might not have seen much of. He's 20 years old and averages like 19 with the ball this summer. Kind of always plays, always bowls second change. And that if you're able to produce players of that quality who aren't playing for England just yet, you're going to do pretty well. Jo, you mentioned it last week. The reason why they started the final round 20 points clear was that Essex lost against Hampshire after declaring that sort of left the door open for Hampshire. I mean, Phil, it's not the reason why Essex haven't won it, but it's a big reason why it didn't go down to the final day, possibly.
Yeah, we were watching it, following it quite closely. I was surprised that they pulled out that early. They had already announced it actually that overnight that they were going to dangle a reasonably large-shaped carrot, if you like. But those 5 points that you'd have guaranteed for a draw, and Essex had it in their pockets. They went wild in their third innings, and fair enough, up to a point. Front foot cricket, baseball cricket, you got to live a little. It's part of the indelible identity of the club as well. Under Fletcher and so on back in the days, you'd always find a way to win a game or prepare to lose a game in order to win a game. But a bit more pragmatism would have still given them a decent chance, right? Hampshire were 30 for 4 right, in about 8 overs. A bit more pragmatism, they could have basically secured that 5 points regardless. Hampshire were going to go for it anyway. I thought they got their maths a bit iffy because those 5 points, if they had bagged them for a draw, and Hampshire won in the last over, by the way, thanks to a stunning 100 by Dawson.
What a season he's having.
And we'll come to him later, I imagine. And then Vince made a quick 70 odd or whatever. But if Essex had taken those 5 points, we wouldn't have said at the start of the show, Surrey have just won the championship, because Essex, although they're behind comfortably here against Northants, if they bowl Northants out for 200, chase 350 on the final day and win. And on the other side of things, Hampshire are up against Surrey. So if Hampshire were to beat Surrey on a result pitch and Essex were to beat Northants, then bonus points are irrelevant.
Yeah.
So those 5 points are still, if only Wesley had them in his back pocket, then okay, they're behind in this game. It would take one hell of a fourth day chase. But nonetheless, they'd still be in the game and we'd still have a live championship just if those 5 points were in Essex's back pocket.
I think we can also credit Northants slightly with manufacturing this end to the county championship.
Right. So they played all the cricket here last week.
Yeah.
All the cricket against Surrey.
Yeah.
And now they're looking like they're going to turn Essex over.
Do you see their coach? I thought was some interesting quotes saying the players got sucked into baseball at the start of the season. That what had got them safety last year was playing kind of very solid, pragmatic cricket. I don't think they only won a couple of games, but got a lot of draws.
They finished sixth, I think. So
yeah,
relatively safe.
But a great achievement to finish sixth for Northants, given their resources. But this year there was all the talk about coming out, playing differently, playing your shots, and he said he thought their players got a bit sucked into that, and it's only latterly in the season that they've kind of gone back to what they were good at, and we saw that here at the Oval. They batted really kind of doggedly to set up a good game. But yeah, it's just interesting that baseball is fashionable and has clearly worked brilliantly for Durham, but actually some counties won't have the players in order to pull it off.
Well, it was interesting, just as Essex dangled the carrot against Hampshire, Burns and Sibley were going at 1-over to make sure they got the draw against Northants. So more than one way to do it. Yeah, I loved it. It was one for the purists. In the relegation battle, it's still neck and neck between Middlesex and Kent, so that's too tight to call at the moment. And in Division 2, Worcestershire sealed promotion yesterday. They will join Durham in Division 1 next year. It'll be fascinating to see how they go without the likes of Tongue, Pennington and Haynes, who are all off to knots. The Southern Vipers won the Rachel Hayhoe Flint Trophy this week to become the first regional side to do the domestic double, having won the Charlotte Edwards Cup earlier this year. Emily Windsor top scored in the run chase for the Vipers. And Charlotte Edwards' record as a coach is just absurd. So she's been a coach for 12 competitions. 11 times out of 12 she's gotten to the final. She's won 7 out of the 12 competitions she's coached. Katya, why is Edwards so successful, and particularly at the Vipers?
I don't know. Well,
great answer. Just leave it there.
I think if you look specifically at the Vipers have got a depth of experienced players in the squad beyond what other regions have got. So beyond their England stars, if you like, they've got people like Georgia Elwes and Georgia Adams and Emily Windsor, on top of like Charlie Dean and Lauren Bell and Maya Boucher and Freya Kemp and, Danny Wyatt. And then they've also got people like Rihanna Southby and Lindsay Smith. So if you look at the consistency of the skill level and the experience across the squad, they're not relying on those kind of under 19 or younger players as heavily as other regions are. And I think that plays quite a big part in why the Vipers are so successful. I don't think there's been a year of this regional setup that the Vipers haven't won a trophy. Could be wrong on that, but that's my recollection of it. But with Charlotte Edwards, everything she touches just kind of turns to gold. Like, it's not just that she makes these winning sides. She does it so quickly. Like the WPL, Mumbai Indians won this year in the first year of the competition. In her first year as coach of Sydney Sixers, I think, in the WBBL, they got to the final, lost in the final, but got to the final. So she doesn't just come in and coach these sides and make them into winning sides. She does it immediately. And that's what's so impressive. I don't know whether there's a factor of her being such a respected voice that all these players will have known and grown up with and knows what she's doing, but there's something there that would be great if everyone knew what it was, because you could just copy and paste it. But it's brilliant, and long may it continue as a Hampshire and Southern Vipers fan. So
future England coach, surely?
Yeah, I mean, you've got to say at some point it's gonna happen. I mean, I don't think the timing for her was quite right when the job came up last year, but I think you've got to think that at some point she's gonna get offered that job and say yes to it.
Earlier this week, the ECB published details of the steps they're going to take to make cricket a more inclusive sport in response to the ICEC report that was released early in the summer. Just a reminder of what the report concluded. It said that racism, sexism, classism and elitism are widespread in English and Welsh cricket. And we're going to devote a full episode to this later in the winter. But Phil, what was your immediate response to the ECB response?
Well-meaning and sincere, and I thought the report itself was generally extremely thorough and exhaustive and necessary, and I think it's been relatively well received across the board, with one or two notable exceptions, Sir Ian Botham being one. I'd like to think that his particular dissenting voice is smallish across the game. I'd like to think that. He said that he threw the report on the floor, threw it in the bin or whatever it was, on some podcast with Simon Jordan. I really, really hope that attitude doesn't isn't prevailing elsewhere. Over 4,000 people responded to the original question of describe your lived experience in cricket. But of course, beyond the 4,000 respondents are the many, many tens and hundreds of thousands of people who don't even know what the game is, who have felt forever, if they feel anything regarding cricket, that it's not a thing for them. And we can move across every single demographic, and there are elements of that demographic where people will have felt that. There was a quote that jumped out at me that illustrated just how complex an issue it is for the ECB, financially as much as anything else. You know, they have a big inbox of challenges. I think they've got two decent blokes in charge in the Richards, Thompson and Gould. But just let me find, this is Gould, who is nothing if not pragmatic. And he says, we have two priorities at the moment in terms of the finances of the game. And so much of these questions, so much of these schemes, initiatives, plans, programs are money dependent. He says two priorities in terms of the finances of the game. One is ICEC and the wider discussion on EDI, equality, diversity and inclusion. And the other is to make sure we don't lose all our best players to a variety of different franchise tournaments around the world. And I think it's his way of saying we want to be blue sky thinking and ambitious, and we recognise that the game has turned people over, whole swathes of society for years and decades, and we've discussed this informally and off this podcast and between ourselves, and I've spent 20 years writing and talking about this stuff, and it drives me mad and it breaks my heart. I believe that they want to be as ambitious as possible, but that line is Gould also saying we live in the real world, and the real world is knotty and entangled and messy. There is another kicker to that we also live in a time where players have more power, and this is, I'm not saying it's on them to take pay cuts. I'm not saying that, but this is also indicative of the landscape, right? That, you know, players are demanding more and more of cut of the pie, because otherwise they'll go elsewhere. These are the balls that are being juggled by the ECB. Talking of money, 2 million has been pledged to the 5 different charities that are affiliated to the ECB and whose role is specific to trying to develop cricket in areas that it's hitherto been inaccessible. That's nowhere near enough. 2 million spread across five different charities, nowhere near enough. And the concern is that money might be spread so thinly that it ceases to make that much difference. These organisations, they need our support. They need people who are listening to this show or watching this show. They need proper engagement from the punters out there, because they are extraordinary organisations on their own terms, but they can't be propped up by the ECB because the ECB doesn't have enough money, or it isn't generating enough money, and it has its own priorities elsewhere. 25 million for women's cricket, quite right too. But 2 million, it seems to me, doesn't seem enough spread across those charities. Just on ACE though, this is what's possible. This is what is possible. ACE is 3 years old. It's reached 20,000 kids, right? Now, there will be some people who email into us, people who love the game, know the game, they'll say, it's window dressing. It's putting a plastic blue bat in a kid's hand on a cold Tuesday morning, and that's all you do. It's not. It's more than that. ACE in particular, and only focusing on them, Chance to Shine, MCC Foundation do amazing work. ACE, 3 years in, they've reached 20,000 kids, right? 78 of the schools that they've gone to have never had cricket before. 87% of the kids that they've reached have never seen cricket before. So this is not via the back door going to kids who are already into cricket, but using them to flesh up the numbers. 87% of kids never held a cricket ball or a cricket bat before in their lives. Listen, of that 20,000 kids, 1 in 5 are already in an academy program, a county academy program. So 4,000 of these 20,000 kids are county youth players in 3 years. In 3 years. Now, ACE have done this on their own. The ECB, certainly in the past, asleep at the wheel. So ACE had to do it on their own. Ebony, she said to everyone, I just got fed up with waiting, so I did it myself. The ECB are now, rightly, belatedly, supporting these organisations as they can, there needs to be more support. There needs to be even more funds generated to back up these kinds of extraordinary separate organizations. Play those numbers out in your head again. This is what's possible. This is what's possible. It's not just the black community. It's the white working class community as well that ACE has tackled and targeted. And the numbers are staggering. What an achievement that is. That's what's possible. The most positive thing for me is that there is no question that these conversations now have to be had. It's been totally normalized. And if this was happening 5 years ago, 10 years ago, then the likes of Botham would be, without a doubt, the prevailing voice in a game which refused to acknowledge its own iniquities, its own hypocrisies. Now, this is a completely normalised and necessary conversation that is being had at all levels, and thank God for that.
And it's telling that Botham's only saying that in a completely non-cricket context on a podcast with someone who's got nothing to do with cricket.
Yeah, and he's saying, I don't recognise that experience. Well, of course he doesn't, because it's not his experience. But anyway, let's not devote any more time to Botham. But it feels like those numbers are hugely encouraging. A lot of people will use them to beat the ECB with for what they've done previously, and completely fair enough. But actually, the much more inspiring thing is what can be done in such a short space of time. And yeah, I think there is obviously a recognition that things need to change on a human level based on people's experience in the game and how awful they've been. But I think when you hear numbers like that, the ECB are also thinking it's not only the right thing to do, it's the sensible thing to do. They're talking about future-proofing the game. They're talking about financially backing the game. You can't afford to have those 4,000 kids not in those county academy age groups. That is the future of the game.
That's why 2 million seems like a small amount of money, really. You think maybe speculate a bit to accumulate,
contract.
Right? Right. Well, again, I mean, I sort of alluded to that anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, you think maybe find some money down the back of the sofa now, because, as Joe says, it future-proofs your game in the future.
It's not just the amount of money. I think there's a conversation that needs to be had about what you're doing specifically with that money, because there's been money thrown at problems for years and years and years and years, but it doesn't solve them, or it doesn't get anywhere close to solving them. So what was it, 25 million for the women's game as well? Well, what is that money actually going to do? You know, they're equalising match fees, but match fees don't equal salaries, for example.
It's going towards this pledge, whether they hit it or not, is massively up for grabs, but they want to treble the number of women's teams by 2029. So they've given themselves 6 years or whatever it is, 5-6 years, to treble the number of teams in the UK. So I guess that is their specific target. We wait and see whether they get anywhere near it.
Good, but it's nuts and bolts, isn't it? You know, you don't just address these issues with widespread money and changes and all that. You need to go down to the nitty-gritty, the nuts and bolts, and what you're actually going to physically change and how you're going to use this money to make that change. So yeah, 25 million going to developing those girls teams, great, but you know, in the 100, should you still be paying Alice Capsey a quarter of what you know, a male player who plays only 4 of the games gets paid? You know, there's a lot that needs to be discussed, and I'm not necessarily convinced that a blanket approach to this, and I'm not saying it is a blanket approach, but that's what it seemed like to me, is the best way to go about fixing problems that are so ingrained on every level. And it's going to take so much time and so much effort beyond the financial stuff, but you know, maybe you just need to give it time, but I'm not massively convinced.
No, I hear what you're saying, and I wrote about this when the 100 was just, when not a ball had been bowled yet, and I said now's the perfect time, not just match fees, but the whole shebang. So if a player is worth 125 grand, top male player, then make the top female player, because you're starting from scratch. And then people say, yeah, but what about the capitalist principle? Oh, go fuck yourselves, frankly. There was no consideration of the human sacrifice, right? You know, female players traveling the length and breadth of the country and losing money. Think of the efforts that their parents would have made to get those players to get to that kind of point. And then people are talking about the capitalist principle of you know, revenue generation. Well, the 100 was the moment, and they botched that one.
Well, it was telling that at the time of its launch, they really celebrated the fact that it was equal prize money, which, you know, is, first of all, how many players actually win the 100? So you're talking about a very small number who are getting the same thing as the blokes. And also, that's such a minor factor in what you're taking home anyway as your wages, even if you are winning it.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of a fatigue on all levels, on all counts of, discrimination and inequality, of celebrating the baby steps,
Right.
or the bare minimum, and it's kind of getting a bit wearing to keep celebrating equal match fees, equal prize money. Let's actually make some proper change.
I agree.
understand what's
And
going on.
100%.
just on that, after a similar report in 1999, Tim Lamb, the ECB chief exec, said, "Complacency on racial equality is not acceptable. We must open doors to everyone." And a leading campaigner in response to the ECB statement at the time said, "They have talked the talk. Now we must see if they are prepared to walk the walk." That was 24 years ago.
I don't want to drop Tim Lamb in it because, he was very charming and nice to me when I interviewed him last year for a similar piece to what we're talking about here in the magazine. But he didn't remember that it even took place. And when I asked him if there was a problem with discrimination, racism in the game 20 years ago, he said, no, I always thought it was a very open and inclusive game. And he'd forgotten that he'd actually commissioned the report himself and given quotes about it.
Anyway, moving on. As you'll be aware by now, in the build-up to the World Cup, we're looking back at vintage moments of 50 over World Cups gone by. And what better way to do this than with Laithwaite's wine and pairing some of our favourite moments with some of their stunning wines. So for our third vintage moment, we're looking at Grant Elliott's 6 in the 2015 World Cup semi-final against South Africa, the one that got them over the line. And the wine we're pairing this with is Hole in the Clouds.
It works.
It works.
It does work.
It does work. It does work. Hole in the Clouds is a white wine loved by Laithwaite's customers. The Marlborough Sauvignon is a phenomenon. The northern tip region on New Zealand's South Island delivers wines bounding with fabulous, ripe tropical fruit and zingy citrus freshness. You'll be sure to enjoy it if you purchase it, as I'm sure we will right now.
Come then.
Everyone in?
It's 1:15 at this point, so this is a much more reasonable time to be opening the Sauvignon Blanc on a Thursday afternoon.
Joe and me had the most spectacularly pompous conversation about Chardonnay versus Sauvignon Blanc just before the show began.
I'm glad we weren't recording for that one.
I think we can pick that up actually next week.
Joe, the moment itself, I remember 2015 World Cup, I was at uni, and for this game I really screwed up my sleeping hours, so I missed most of I think I watched the beginning, missed a big chunk in the middle, but very much got the end of it. And I remember being totally obsessed with that New Zealand side in that tournament, and I just remember the noise when Elliott hits that 6 into the crowd was just amazing.
Yeah, well, New Zealand were the darlings of that World Cup, really. Played a lot of their games on home soil, played this kind of ultra-aggressive brand of cricket under McCullum. I think they won 7 games straight heading into that semi-final. And McCullum was just doing outrageous things. Even in this South Africa game, at one stage, he had 4 slips and a gully early in South Africa's innings. And then he hit a 22 ball 50 himself, I think. But in the end, the game is the Grant Elliott game. 36-year-old South African-born all-rounder, not your most fashionable cricketer. I think there's a bit of surprise he was even in New Zealand's World Cup squad. And he comes to the crease with New Zealand going okay, game very much in the balance, and plays the innings of his life. So it came down to 12 needed from the final over to be bowled by Dale Steyn. Vittori on strike, and then it gets down to 5 needed from 2 with Elliott on strike. And it's a kind of, I think Steyn would say it probably wasn't what he was going for, is a length ball, but Elliott spots it early, goes deep in his crease and leathers it over mid-on. And then there's this kind of, I was going to say fantastic, but sort of kind of tragic image of Steyn flat on his back, lying up at the hole in the clouds, I guess.
Oh, Joe. Huh?
You can send me an extra bottle for that one. And then you have Spider Cam zooming around Steyn's head as he's lying there trying to figure out how South Africa... I don't think you can really... It's fashionable to say South Africa bottle it. I don't think they really bottled that one, but, failed.
Rain played a part in it as well, because it sort of disrupted South Africa when they were going really well.
Definitely. They were a bit unlucky. But this was a game between two sides who couldn't get past the semi-finals. New Zealand had lost 6 semi-finals before this. I think South Africa had lost 3. And it was 7-time lucky for New Zealand, who obviously couldn't do it in the final, lost to Australia, but they were everyone's favourite team in that tournament. And it was a huge tournament for New Zealand cricket. And I remember speaking to a couple of players, Kane Williamson afterwards, saying this was a time when we were suddenly competing with rugby, and young people wanted to go out and play cricket, and that was the fashionable sport to play, at least for that period. Rugby obviously still dominates, but yeah, an amazing shot from a great innings in a really, really good World Cup.
As a reminder, if you enjoy the sound of any of our wines that we've been drinking across the podcast, they are available at Laithwaite's, and don't forget, you're 25% off when you buy 6 or more bottles with that code Wisden at checkout.
It's genuinely top class.
It's really good, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's really, really good.
All right with the Sauvignon Blanc now.
Well, it's a
good point,
superior SB. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
It's not generally my go-to.
And I'd say slightly more enjoyable at 1:15 in the afternoon compared to 9 in the morning as we've done it in previous weeks. On to our end of season awards. So I've asked Phil, Jo, Katya and Butch for their player of the international summer, the player of the domestic summer, and then their biggest whinge of the season. First, let's hear what Butch had to say. Over to Butch to continue our awards of the summer. Butch, your international player of the summer.
It's not a straightforward one, this, because there's a lot of candidates, including sort of like the most obvious, I suppose, in Ben Stokes and what he's done. Chris Wokes also in the Ashes was staggeringly good, even though he didn't play in the first 2. But I'm going to give it to a bloke who's received a lot of stick over the last couple of years as an international player. He's also received an enormous amount of backing from the people that matter, I suppose. And that's Zach Crawley. I thought he played magnificently throughout the Ashes against a high quality bowling attack. Played in the aggressive way that Stokes and McCullum wanted, but also added a sort of a steeliness and some technical proficiency to go along with the obvious sort of ball striking talent that he has. And those returns in the Ashes series were unbelievably good. It was a vindication of the fact that they stuck with him, and also a vindication of something more in Zach Crawley than just being a good ball striker, really, which was that he realised that he had things to work on. He worked on them. I mean, we may have pointed them out once or twice as to what they might have been, and he got there in the end, and he played as well as any opening batter in a home series that I can remember since sort of the days of Alistair Cook. So I think he gets it.
Quite often when people talk about Crawley summer, there's as you said, a lot of credit goes to the management for backing him, and it almost doesn't give Crawley enough credit for doing what he did, and like the ball striking and the way he plays fast bowling is almost taken as granted, but actually to work on those technical deficiencies and iron those out in quite a short space of time, because it looked pretty ugly at the start of the year over in New Zealand, is actually incredibly impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. And take nothing away from him at all. I mean, look, people will make the argument, well, if you get as many chances of that at some point as that, you're going to come good. But I suppose, the thing that they'd always said about him was that they thought that his ceiling was just so much higher than pretty much everybody else's. And that has been proven to be correct. And anyone that has seen him play half decently, sort of in the back of their heads, even if you were sort of calling for him to be axed and never play again, you kind of knew that at some point, if he irons out one or two of the sort of the gimme ways of getting out, that he could be a very dangerous player. And not just dangerous, but good. I mean, it was seriously good batting from him throughout that Ashes series.
And your domestic player of the summer is someone who we could see in England Test whites quite soon, possibly.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one to go through, isn't it? The domestic player of the summer, you've got sort of the competitions which are very much front and centre, or the competition that is very much front and centre, the 100, and everything else seems to pale into insignificance behind it in terms of its prominence. But I still look at the county championship as being kind of the number one marker, I suppose. And Liam Dawson has had the most extraordinary year, really. He's a very mature player now, very experienced, obviously. And his England days have appeared to have been behind him, but he's making such an incredible case for himself to be sort of like an all-rounder, a spin bowling all-rounder that if he doesn't go to India, then he really has upset somebody. But he's been sensational for Hampshire with bat and ball. And is somebody that I think we'll see in England colours again very soon.
Averaging over 40 with the bat and 45 wickets at 20 at the time of recording. He's not very Bazball, but do you think that England will find a way to include him at least in the squad for India?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, I think if everybody is Bazball, then, you know, it's a little bit like the argument that could be made for Ben Folkes, you know, the unfortunate, the now missing Ben Folkes, is that whilst he was in the team, he provided a nice bit of ballast for the others, and England were very successful with him in the team in Bazball cricket. And also, I think he's the best spinner we've got. I mean, you know, with no disrespect to Jack Leach, but I think he's a better, smarter bowler than Jack, and also scores hundreds. You know, he's kind of Jack Leach +2, isn't he? You know, fields in the gully, scores hundreds. He's a very, very good cricketer, and England don't have very many of those that do what he does in terms of being a spin bowling all rounder. So, you know, it's really good for him that he's kind of pushed his case. He's pushed his case without pushing it, because, you know, he says whenever we speak to him on the telly that, you know, he thinks his England days are behind him. He doesn't really give it much thought anymore. He just wants to go out and win games for Hampshire, and we've certainly been doing that.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I spoke to him earlier in the summer as well, and he said exactly the same. England wasn't really on his radar, and he's in this weird position in his career where, because of how good he is at T20 cricket, he actually does have a reasonably busy winter, picking up deals in the PSL, doing very well there. So yeah, he's not someone who's low on choice for how he spends his winter.
No. And also, that's also testament to the fact that he's not a one-trick pony. I mean, you know, you say he's not Bazball, but he's pretty handy. I mean, in fact, the two examples that I can think of were both sort of glorious failures. In the end, there was a brilliant knock that he played at the back end of one of the 7 Pakistan T20 internationals back in September of last year, and he was sort of one hit away from a heroic sort of rear guard run chase win with the bat that included some Bazball type striking. And then, of course, in the One Day Cup against Leicestershire just recently, where he was he got them to the brink and then scooped one down fine leg's throat that he probably could have hit back over the bowler's head for 6. So look, he's just a very good cricketer. End of.
Yeah, and an amazing impact on the end of the championship season as well. 100 in a 4th innings against Essex, and then a 5 against Surrey in the last round as well.
Yeah, which I'm guessing has pleased Phil Walker enormously, as the declaration probably did as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And finally, your whinge of the summer. I know you're not someone who likes to whinge, so this has been difficult for you to come up with.
It's been very tough, actually. It's been very, very tough. But I think that the main one really is that, you know, we sort of packed up our test match notebooks and microphones and put them away for the year at the end of July. I don't think there's anything bigger than that, really. That the main feast of the summer was done before the summer had kind of started, and you know, that's an eternal whinge that'll carry on for as long as the schedule remains the way that it is. So yeah, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. That one is kind of, even though we've had good cricket, and obviously the end to the championship is going to be a decent one. You know, with it going down to the very last round, and, you know, promotion relegation by and large is still open as well. The very fact that the most exciting part, the most looked forward to part of the summer was finished before a week after most of the schools broke up is not good.
Yeah, is that basically that kids in the school holidays couldn't watch that much of it? Is that the biggest gripe for it not being in August?
Well, maybe and maybe not. I mean, you know, it wasn't as though the grounds were empty. You know, you had great support, great great drama and all of those things. But it's kind of, you know, the game then disappears from view for people. I think it's the point that the Ashes it drags people in from you know, who are not necessarily keeping an eye on what's going on in the cricketing world otherwise. And, you know, during the height of the summer, albeit the weather wasn't great, you know, it had gone. It was over and done with, and it felt to a lot of people as though kind of like the cricket season was over come the end of July, which of course is not the case. There were good crowds in 100, and the kids really enjoyed it. My little one kind of out of nowhere decided that she's going to be a Welsh Fire supporter till the end of her days, and kind of proving the point that a new generation kind of has more choices or a choice to make that doesn't feel like it's been foisted upon them by their parents or their grandparents. So that was that's what it's there to do, and I think that by and large that's what it's done. But still, Ashes finished at the end of July.
Yeah, good 2 months ago almost. Cheers for your time, Butch. Catch you next week for our World Cup preview.
No problem.
Katya, do you want to kick us off?
What do you want? Which one?
All three of them.
Okay, player of the international summer was Nat Sciver-Brunt, who we spoke about a bit on the pod last week, and it kind of got me thinking about how good she's actually been this summer. So when I was thinking about who the player of the summer should be this time round, there didn't feel like many kind of standouts. It felt like everyone had performed at a pretty good level, and there had been individual moments of brilliance, but not someone who'd shone across the entire summer above all the rest. And then I actually thought about it a bit more, and Nat Sciver-Brunt scored 2 ODI centuries against the most dominant side in the world, scored 78 in the Women's Ashes Test match, looked nailed on to get 100 before she made a mistake to Ash Gardner. Played a really important role in the Lord's T20 and getting England over the line to beat Australia for the first time in a T20 series in God knows how long, and then finished the summer with the fastest ever ODI century in a Women's England ODI t-shirt. So that's a pretty decent summer, I'd say. And with the ODI centuries, if you look at the one in Southampton in particular, that was the one she scored in a losing cause, but it was arguably the best. You won't see many better ODI centuries than that, literally carrying England over the line, nearly over the line, right to the last ball. And when you think of where she was last summer as well, when she was captaining in the Commonwealth Games, and that all went so wrong towards the end of the tournament, and then she had to take a break away from the game for her own mental health, and to come back as strongly as she had, it's a remarkably quick turnaround for her to come back and be at the level of performance she's at right now. And as much as I'm loath to make parallels across the games, and particularly with these players, there's so many parallels with Ben Stokes and Nat Sciver. It's absolutely unreal. Like the level of performance they bring to the side, the role they fill for the side, both having dodgy knees that are preventing them from bowling at the minute. It's absolutely kind of ridiculous, because they're players that go about the game in such a different way. Like Ben Stokes seems to run on emotion and occasion and theatre, whereas Nat Sciver-Brunt comes in on a level head with clinical, getting the job done, getting England over the line. And this summer, it's just made her look a cut above the rest of everyone else. She's averaging 131 in ODI cricket this year. She's scored in excess of 50 in 10 of her last 23 ODI innings, and scored 500s in the last 2 years. Like, those are absolutely ridiculous numbers. Captaining as well in the last game of the summer. So yeah, she's my player of the summer, and I think it's justifiable.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's a persuasive case.
Yeah.
Average 131.
Quite
This year in ODI
hard to
cricket.
argue with an average of
hell.
130. Should we do international players of the years first, so we all remember who we were saying? Joe, who's your international player this summer?
I was tempted by Crawley and Wokes, but I've gone for Mark Wood, even though he only played 3 international matches
Did he really?
this summer. 14 wickets at 20 in the Ashes, but those numbers don't really tell the story. When he came into that series, England's Ashes hopes were looking pretty bleak. Obviously 2-0 down, and then that first bat at Headingley getting up to 96 miles an hour, got his first 5 for in England, and just completely changed the complexion of the series, and obviously had some fun with the bat to get them over the line as well. So yeah, he's when I look back at this summer, he's the international player that I'll remember. That particularly that spell at Headingley, it's just stunning to watch. Yeah, Mark Wood.
Phil?
Well, I'm not going to go with Wokes, despite saying on the WhatsApps that I was going to go with Wokes. I'm going to go with Duckett. He's got the highest strike rate in the history of Test match openers, male Test match openers. He strikes at 87 per 100 balls. He began the year with a big 100 against Ireland, where he didn't leave anything, and then carried on not leaving anything to an almost comical degree. And while Crawley was the standout player, and I think Butch would have done that, Duckett and him worked beautifully together as a sort of slightly comical Laurel and Hardy sort of double act, really. And Duckett, the Oval in particular, was brilliant. 2 runnable 40s, which gets lost in the in the overall story,
Mm.
but again, just indicative of how he went about it. He never deviated, right? And he didn't play well in the first Test match. Second Test match, just practiced the shot that he got out to make it even more daring, but more effective. And those two 80 odds, 90 odd he made at Lords, all right in a losing cause, but really did set the tone for how he was going to go to hell with the consequences. And I thought that was indicative, really. Crawley's always played like that. Duckett came into the side and had the guts to do it like that, and then peeled off a 70 ball 100. All right, it's a low profile game at the fag end of the year, but still made it quite clear that I'm here to stay and I've got class.
He's an extraordinary, I know we talk about it, sweeper of a ball.
He is, yeah.
The way in which he pierces the fielders in the deep. He's so precise with it.
Yeah.
He's got so many different types of sweeps. I'm
And
sure we'll see him play more white ball cricket.
Somebody surprising themselves by how successful they've been. And, he said himself he didn't think he could be a Test match player because of the way that he played. He thought that his ceiling would be county because of attitudes and his own game. Well, it's turned out that he can hold his own. There's big challenges to come. India will be a massive ask for him, although, as you say, he does play the turning ball interestingly. But I just think, he epitomises what England's men's team have managed to do this summer, and so I'll give it to him. Plus, he's literally trying to get the Duckett bucket hat off the ground and make probably more money on the back of that than he will play for England.
And if people want to read an interview with Crawley and Duckett about their partnerships, is there anywhere they can do that?
I don't know, mate.
My player this summer, international summer, is Stokes. Almost similar reasons to Joe. If I just think about the summer, who made it what it was. Stokes was so central, even when you don't take into account his actual cricketing influence. At Lords, it's one of the best Test innings of all time. He also broke the England all-time record for the highest ODI score.
Just because he thought, I better do that.
Yeah, I might
just
as
to
well.
irritate people.
And then halfway through his innings, he said afterwards he forgot that there was so much time in ODIs, and
turn it in, son.
Yeah, so Stokes for me.
Newsflash: Alistair Cook has departed. 7 for 2 now, Essex. All right, the game's done. The
for
championship's
the last
done.
time in his first-class career.
Well, indeed, Joe. Indeed. So a rather sort of ignominious end, really. Nicks off to Ben Sanderson. Look, if you want to go anyway,
that's the way to do it.
That is the
well,
way.
he had a pretty good
farewell
farewell
hold
here.
this line round the wicket.
He had a pretty good farewell here, didn't he? So I think it's only fair that you nick off to Ben Sanderson to call time on your first-class career if that's what it is going to be.
In the gloaming of Wantage Road.
Yeah, I mean,
having just lost the county championship.
Having just lost the title.
We don't know for certain this is his last game, but reports last week said that he will consider his future at the end of the season. Katya, your domestic player of the summer.
Alex Lees is my domestic player of the summer. Scored a ridiculous amount of runs, leading run scorer by about 200 or so in Division 2. 5 centuries, most of which came in the space of like 6 games, something ridiculous. Scored 2 centuries in one match at one point. Also scored 144 against Sussex in the Metro Bank. And when you put it in the context of what Durham have achieved this year as well, it's pretty significant. His strike rate is 73.76 in the county championship. And it's self-explanatory really that he's understood the assignment better than anyone who's been dropped by England in the last few years. Like Crawley and Duckett have obviously done an exceptional job and are not going anywhere anytime soon, but he's done so much to make sure he stays ahead of that pack who are waiting if one of them gets injured or stops performing at the level they have been, or they need someone else in that top 3. And on a wider point about Durham as well, it's going to be so interesting to see what they do in Division 1 next year. And Lees is going to be the key to that, one of the keys to that, if he keeps up the form that he's had across the entirety of the summer, pretty much.
Joe?
Sorry, we were talking about Charlotte Edwards earlier and her success at domestic level. But with her, for a lot of that has been Georgia Adams, who's won a treble herself, Charlotte Edwards Cup, Rachel Hayhoe Flint, and the 100. She's been probably the most reliable domestic run scorer for a few years now, but this year she's become a genuine all-rounder, was the leading wicket taker by a distance in the 100, took 16 wickets for the off breaks, played a crucial knock in the final to keep Danny White company, and then she came out of that and made runs in every match for the Vipers in the final bit of the Rachel Hayhoe Flint Trophy, finished second highest run scorer in that, 4th highest wicket taker, and earlier in the season had captained Vipers to their second successive Charlotte Edwards Cup trophy, and she was the third highest run scorer in that as well. So she's had an unbelievable year. She should be in the mix for England. Whether she will be or not, I'm not sure. She probably isn't exactly what they're looking for in terms of spin bowlers. They have got plenty already. In terms of top order batters, we've already seen that Tammy Beaumont's struggling to get into their T20 side. So it's not quite clear how she gets in. But the good thing is, obviously she wants to play for England. But the good thing is that's not the be all and end all now. There is enough out there for domestic women's cricketers in this country that you can still carve out a high profile, successful career. The money is not yet there in the numbers that it should be, but it's getting that way. But she can now be a kind of domestic titan in her own right. And if the England stuff comes, then all the better for it.
What about you, Phil?
Brett D'Oliveira, skipper at Worcester, steadied a pretty listing ship with, as you referenced earlier, the loss of 3 players. The announcement mid-season that 3 of his key players are going to be playing for Notts from next year. Seems like the club are often in a bit of a state of flux, I suppose. And so to steer them to the top division for next year, fair play to him. And he's made runs as well in the last couple of weeks. He's made a 60 and a 70 and a 100 in this current game. His numbers aren't spectacular. You know, he's a good, solid county pro, bowls very useful white ball leggers and makes useful runs from the mid to lower order in red ball cricket. It's more just what he's managed to pull off, really, for a club that is very, very likeable, produces lots of good young cricketers, and then they're swallowed up by less progressive but richer clubs elsewhere. That's the nature of the beast, I suppose. And so to have pulled that off deserves a hell of a lot of credit. He was part of a captain's round table that we did at the start of the season. I liked his style. I liked his love for the game, really. He says, I just want to play all the time. He said, schedules, whatever, just let's play. Let's play. This is what we're here for. And yeah, I just think he's the kind of cricketer that's doing a great job outside the limelight, in the margins. He's not going to be playing international cricket, but it matters what he's doing, and his club matters too.
I picked out 2 players. I've got Jordan Clark at Surrey and Matt Critchley at Essex. 2 players who had massive influence on the title race. Jordan Clark, someone who hasn't played for England, probably will never play for England. Averaged 20 with the ball and scored a really important 100 for Surrey in the season as well. And Critchley, he's been talked about as a leg spinner of promise for a while, and his batting that was decent. But to average over 40 for Essex this season, I think averaged again about 20 with the ball.
I was surprised at that. I looked at that earlier when I saw you mention him. I guess he would only be, because they've got Harman, he probably only bowls when, the pitch is turning a bit, so that probably works in his favour. But it's a really good record he's put together. Yeah,
it's really good. And I think that obviously with Moeen Ali no longer around the test setup, if England are looking for a top 7 option in the years to come who also bowls spin, he is someone who could fulfill that role, I guess in a similar way to how people talk about Will Jacks, perhaps. Anyway, this should be the fun one, the whinge of the year. Keep them reasonably brief. Katya, do you want to start?
My whinge of the year is, I think, related to Butch's point about the scheduling. The Women's Ashes finished on a Tuesday evening in Taunton. And in Taunton, everything closes at 8 p.m. on a Tuesday. And
Is it even open?
Well, that's another question. But apparently the England celebrations were in a Holiday Inn on the M5 because everything shut at 8 p.m. on a Tuesday. I get the Ashes to Ashes, and I think that was a great initiative in how it brought attention to the women's game, and I still to the Women's Ashes, and I still think there is something to be said for it. I think we should be working towards a future where the Women's Ashes is completely separate to the Men's Ashes and is potentially played in a different year at a different time.
Is that your preference in the end?
In the end, yeah. I don't think we're quite there yet, but think about how great that series was this year and how much more attention it would have got if the next day we weren't all looking at the weather apps in Manchester. England won the T20 series at Lords at the same time as Mark Wood was playing at Headingley, so it's just kind of, it could have been done a bit better. I understand why they needed that gap in August and they all needed to be done at a certain point, but it didn't work particularly well having such a brilliant series. Imagine if those ODIs had been swapped and England had won at Southampton and were going to Bristol as a decider to actually win the women's Ashes, and it was on a Tuesday at the same time as the men's Ashes were going on. It's not an ideal scenario, and that's my whinge that the scheduling should have done better. Having said that, I don't want to be the person in charge of the schedule. So,
Jo, what's your whinge? This is an annual whinge.
Yeah, I know. I do feel like a bit of a stuck record, but they're the best whinges, aren't they? That you just do every year. Yeah, the fact that not everyone plays each other twice in Div 1, it's a nonsense. Last year, Surrey only played Hampshire, who were their closest rivals for much of last season, once. And then this year, Surrey only played Essex, their nearest challengers, once. Early May at Chelmsford, tight, rain-affected game, ended in a draw, Surrey clinging on at the end, and then they don't play each other again. I'm not suggesting any great conspiracy here. It's done on a rotational basis, and Surrey have been the best side over the last 2 years, but if this is still supposedly the premier domestic competition in the country, then yeah, you need to be playing each other twice. It diminishes the competition. Obviously, there is a lot of fixtures to pack in, and that's why it happens. 18 games is probably too many to expect. That would be what you'd need in a 10 division top tier. But if that's the case, then I would cut Division 1 to 8 or 9 teams, play 14 or 16 games, but make sure that everyone plays each other twice to make it fair.
I agree with that. Phil?
Those who want the 100 to fail, or for it to just go away, I find it bewildering that so much energy is constantly, so much shade is thrown at it all the time, and so much energy is expending on rubbishing it. And I speak as a county diehard and someone who doesn't have any dog in the fight of the 100 and don't particularly watch it. But look, it's here. It happens. It's 11 v 11. There's bats and balls. Some of it's on primetime terrestrial TV. It's been utterly transformative for the women's game. It's got the full weight of the BBC's media heft behind it. And it's demonstrably done what it was meant to do. And the numbers bear it out. It's taken the game to new untapped areas. It's also tied in for the next few years. So let's just accept it, right? The numbers is worth doing. It is worth doing. Over 500,000 tickets were sold for the 100. 580,000 tickets were sold for the 100, of which 30% were female buyers, 23% were kids, and 41% were families. You just do not get that demographic anywhere else in English cricket. Nowhere near. And 8% up on average TV watching numbers as well, up to 400,000 on average per game. That's not insignificant numbers at all. Sky's numbers across the women's game have skyrocketed, but across the men's game they've gone up as well a little bit. Look, yeah, the numbers bear it out that it's done what it was meant fundamentally to do. And I find those who queue up to try and destroy it, I find the subtext, I don't like it, because the subtext is you're not a proper cricket fan. Those people, those numbers, you're not the right kind of cricket lover. You're not the right person. I find that reductive, counterproductive.
Just on this, we got a couple of tweets in from a listener called Dave, who said, I just want to say how brilliant the 100 was this year. I had 1 adult and 2 junior tickets to all Phoenix home games at Edgbaston, and it cost me £93, an absolute bargain. Seeing so many families inside the ground for each game can only be a good thing for cricket. My 10-year-old fell in love with it to the point where we went to the T20I against New Zealand, and now he is desperate to go to a day at the Test next year. Yes, the tournament has its issues, but it's definitely succeeded in getting kids invested and growing the women's game. A few listener questions and emails to finish the show off. Simon asks, what would the cricketing equivalent of the Galatasaray penalty that Icardi messed up be? So if you've not seen this, so there's a penalty in a Galatasaray football game over the weekend where the guy taking the penalty doesn't shoot, but instead passes it to a teammate, and it does the goalkeeper, but the striker, who's got an open goal in front of him, misses the goal. So good idea, in theory was working, but the execution didn't didn't work. Phil, you spent a good 20 minutes thinking about this.
No, I forgot to.
Okay.
You forgot to think.
I knew it was on my list, but I was too busy,
Okay.
getting wound up about
We
something
might have
else.
to scratch this bit out then.
No, we should. Come on, there's got to be something.
Surely it's two batters at both ends and the fielder misses the stumps when he throws the ball and he's
Yeah,
like, within range.
That's a good one.
All 3 stumps away.
But
man.
In that case, Phil Tufnell in an ODI in Australia, 1990-91.
Yaz is reaching for the wine to get
But
those
that's the all-time.
brain cells
It's
buzzing.
like the Nathan Lyon moment, only
Yeah.
amplified 3 times over because
Yeah.
both were at one end.
But the problem with the difference with this is it's the Galatasaray penalty is it's a calculated thing, a clever thing that they ballsed up, and that
the best example.
Mankad. It's failed Mankads. So who's the Zampa one in the Big Bash?
Right.
Sort of. He went for the Mankad, but his arm went too far forward. So
you're trying to be smart,
Trying to
but
be
you
smart.
ultimately end up looking
Or
foolish.
it's just
Yeah.
the man cad, but trying to hit the stumps, but missing the
Yes.
stumps when you want to.
Has anyone ever done a really good bit of boundary fielding and then lobbed it back, and the person who's just meant to take the easy has
yes,
just
that's a good.
downed
point.
it? That's the best
yeah,
comparison I can think
Yeah.
of.
No, good stuff.
Otherwise, then you're just going into just terrible cricketing moments. AB de Villiers was once out in a test match against a double bouncer. Bounced twice, tried to whack it out of the ground. It just went straight up in the air and was caught mid-on. But I'm not sure if that's just an open goal that you've missed, isn't it, really? So that doesn't really count.
Good
know.
question, though. Ben writes in to say, hi all. Firstly, thanks for all the great work over the summer. The pod has been a worthwhile companion to a wonderful season of international cricket. My question is, as English cricket journalists, will there ever be a more intense 10-month period reporting on the men's team than a home Ashes, followed by a World Cup in India, then a 5-test series in India? As a fan, it's great, but I can imagine the journalistic burnout. Will we see some journalists retire from ODI reporting after the World Cup? My view on this is I don't think we can ever really complain. We get paid to watch cricket, and it's great. So
I think Phil is in the market for a Red Bull only contract at some stage soon, though.
Stephen writes, there are almost too many things to pick out from the summer, the men's Ashes in particular. The best summer of cricket since 2019, possibly better, which would make it the best since 2005. Looking back at the men's Ashes, it was utterly absorbing. I'm amazed how many big moments I can recall and how I can pinpoint where I was when they happened. I can picture being sat in the office feeling sick as England collapsed on the Friday morning at Lord's. I can still access that feeling of frantically trying to get phone signal in a cinema with my kids as England completed the run chase at Headingley. For me, the series felt like it happened in a parallel universe. Apart from a few friends on a WhatsApp group, very few people in my life care about cricket. It was odd to unplug from reading or listening and just having normal life happen around me. I think the summer was summed up by day 5 of the Oval Test match. I was at a strawberry picking farm with my family during the rain delay. I didn't think they would get back on, so assumed it would finish 2-1. I felt disappointed, but at peace. Then I got a message from a friend alerting me to the fact that it was back on. I spent the next couple of hours pacing around the holiday house we were staying in, playing pool against myself, whilst my extended family enjoyed themselves. When it ended, I just felt an enormous sense of satisfaction and relief. I also look forward to the aftermath, the highlights and the podcast and analysis. I think I enjoyed it having happened more than I enjoyed it happening.
I love that last line. I read this morning. That is a belter of a last line. And it taps in, cricket's, everything is an ongoing conversation, but cricket particularly seems to just lend itself to that.
Yeah. And also, I was thinking today about favourite moments of the summer, and one of mine actually happened on our WhatsApp group after Manchester. So obviously we've addressed, my moment of the summer in a way was the final 2 days of rain at Manchester. I don't think I'll ever get over the rain at Manchester. And Phil went and watched Oppenheimer by himself.
Overrated.
Separate podcast for that. And on the WhatsApp group, we were sort of dealing with the rain, and I was dreading the fact that we had to do not just one but 2 podcasts in the space of 3 days, because we had to do a preview podcast for the 5th test. And Phil's response to this is, if anyone wants to podcast in my place, it's all yours. Fuck this. Then Ben says, I think that's actually probably the energy that podcast listeners want tomorrow. Unfortunately, I think I've worked through my frustration. And then I say, even more bleakly, we've got to do a fucking preview podcast for the 5th test in 2 days' time. Ben replies, loads of other stuff to talk about at least.
It so beautifully sums up everyone's personalities in about 4 messages.
The Harman pre-anger, the emerging teams Asia Cup, County Championship. I can get at least 5 minutes out of the weird Jadeja review in the West Indies Test match. to which Phil replied brilliantly, respectfully, "Fuck off." And I remember as the rain poured down at Manchester, that gave me a little laugh and smile. And then to finish off, we got an email from a listener who
This is
didn't
the longest
leave.
outro of the lot, isn't it?
Also, Essex are going to be all out by the time we finish. They're 11 for 4.
11 for 4 at the moment.
Critchley's gone for 1.
And this listener, I think, will be happy about that. So we got an email from a listener who didn't leave his name, but in fairness to him, he had other things on his mind. He sent a photo of himself in Surrey kit with his newborn baby, Georgina, and he said, looking forward to this one, listening along for the first time tomorrow, hoping the next generation is able to love the game as much as I do and get to listen to people such as yourselves wax lyrical about the game. Alas, it did mean I couldn't get to Southampton for the game this week, but it was nice that Surrey celebrated with Kemar's first wicket shortly after Georgina was born. Congratulations to you and your family. Anyway, that is the end of a really long episode. We'll be back in 4 days' time for our World Cup preview before the first of our something like 47 World Cup daily episodes after that. See you next time.